Hello, friends. Welcome to the Living Truth Podcast. This is Kristin, excited to host today and have the second part of a really great conversation with Molly LaCroix. Molly, thank you for joining me again on our podcast.
So happy to be here.
If you guys haven't listened to Molly's first episode yet, it released before this episode, and I highly recommend you listen to it. But in summary, Molly is an internal family systems licensed marriage and family therapist and helps people overcome adversity and trauma. Internal family systems is a revolutionary therapeutic modality that my husband Michael and I have both really benefited from. And the concept that we all have multiple different parts within us, and these parts serve different roles, that we also are all born with a core self that reflects the image of God. And because so many of you, as our listeners, are struggling with unwanted sexual behavior or sexual betrayal, I really wanted Molly to dive in and open up these two particular populations and how internal family systems may apply. So, Molly, to start with, I would love to hear your take on how sexual betrayal impacts a person's internal family.
Yeah, so if we're going to start with the impact of betrayal,
I mean, we can start
we'll
with
be
the unwanted
starting.
sexual behavior if you prefer.
It probably doesn't matter because
Okay,
there's a reciprocity that's going on, right?
absolutely.
So we can start with the person who's experiencing betrayal, which is a profoundly shattering experience. And I think shattering is an important word because it can speak to the amount of chaos that one notices inside. We've talked about these different parts of ourselves, and a lot of those parts are going to be activated when there's profound betrayal. I assert that betrayal is inherent to trauma. There is some kind of betrayal of trust that has happened with any kind of trauma. But in the case that for much of your audience, we're talking about intimate partner
Yeah.
betrayal. So there's a trust there. This is someone that I've trusted with my most intimate self, and I'm experiencing betrayal. So now the impact on that internal system is going to vary depending on that person's history. So we talked a little bit about last time, our system is shaped beginning in the womb, and to some extent by our ancestry, our genetics. We now understand more about the effects of experiences up the ancestral tree, if you will. But regardless, so whatever happens, particularly in childhood, the nature of an individual's experiences, how much adversity or trauma they experience, that's the system that's in place when this betrayal occurs. So if there's already significant wounding, there will already be lots of different protective parts of the system that have had to adopt strategies to help survive what's already been experienced. And then if there's a new trauma, it's going to be a much more complex system, and than if, let's say, someone had relatively good childhood, good enough parents. No perfect parents out there. None of us entirely escape adversity. All of us have a degree of insecure attachment. Even if the literature talks about secure versus insecure, my contention is that we all have degrees of insecurity in our attachment to significant others because that's the nature of being human. Um, but if it's pretty good, um, I think it'd be interesting. It's so organic and subjective how an event affects the system. So I think it'd be very interesting if we had research that says this good enough situation that I'm talking about. No trauma, relatively low levels of adversity, and then there's this shattering betrayal. Um, would How does that look compared to the person who's had a lot of trauma and another betrayal? I'm not sure I can answer that,
No, and
but
you
it'd
know
be
what's
fascinating
it
to
it would.
unpack.
It would, but here's the thing about like sexual betrayal in marriage that is so complex is that I am always looking at when a woman is asking a question about her situation, I'm looking at there are so many factors involved, like how many years were you married?
Mhm,
How long
mhm.
has this been happening? Like, has it been
Yes.
happening for 25 of your 27
Mhm,
years of marriage?
mhm,
Like,
mhm.
there's just so much complexity to because so many of these betrayal situations, it's been going on for a really
Right.
long time, and
Yeah,
she had no idea. So
yeah.
the reality
Mhm.
collapse,
Yeah,
and also
yeah.
it's very common that it gets exposed, and then there's a recovery attempt, and then there's a relapse.
Of course.
And so
Yeah,
repeat
yeah.
betrayal and the
Right,
complexity of how what in my life was ever real.
right.
Even if somebody
Yes,
has no, like,
yes.
extreme or severe trauma from childhood, that all of that is in and of itself complex trauma.
Yeah. So good point.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about some of the parts you just named. So there is this betrayal and this wound, and um, it can affect one's ability to trust anyone. So are the exiled, the wounded members of our internal family carry pain. That can be emotional pain. It can be distorted beliefs. I'm unlovable.
Mhm.
Clearly, my partner did this because I'm defective. And those defective beliefs I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy, I'm ugly, I'm
Mhm.
stupid. There's no limit to, and again, it's subjective in the system what the system names that, but some kind of defectiveness. And of course, then there are the images, the distressing images of that day that this was discovered, of whatever, whatever. So all of this is going to be held in the system, as you say, no matter what else has happened in their life. There's this new trauma. And whether or not they're existing protectors or new, the system has to adapt. And so a part that's never had a role takes on the role of, maybe we talked last time about an inner critic. One could imagine that that would be a prominent part of the system. How could you be so stupid?
Mhm.
He's been doing this for, or she has been doing this for 20 years and you didn't know? What's wrong with you? So you can imagine that voice being
Oh my
really loud.
goodness, yes.
Yeah. Because as humans, it is a default strategy to blame ourselves. This starts in early childhood because, again, our brains are very immature as humans when we come into this world. So our strategies are very primitive. And we need adults in our life to survive. And so the default is to blame ourselves. And and that never entirely leaves us. It's more pronounced in childhood. We have more capacity as adults to bring perspective, and but I think in the moment the self-blame is going to be there. Why did I ever trust this person in the first place? Etc. So that's going to be in the system. Um, there could, I would imagine, a part of the system that feels something on the continuum from anger to rage.
Oh, that's what I was just thinking about, Molly, is that so many women I know in our program who, like, were never really angry people,
Uh-huh.
all of a sudden become like screaming cave woman banshee, like
Right.
like lose
Yeah.
their minds off
Hmm.
the rails anger.
Yeah.
And then that reinforces this narrative, I must be crazy, because
Right.
they lose
Yeah.
touch with their true selves because they're so
Yeah.
burdened
That's
and
right. Yeah.
constrained.
They're in so much pain that a part of the system is uses rage energy. Anger is energy that we are wired to feel in the face of an injustice.
Yeah.
So betrayal is an injustice.
Huge
So
threat.
it makes sense that
Yeah.
there is anger. And when we can, when there can be a little, now this is probably going to take, again, help from someone outside the system when someone's flooded with rage. But when we can bring compassion to that, when we bring curiosity to, tell me more, what would you like to do with that? There are safe ways we can help people unload the
Mm.
rage, but it's there for a reason. It's there to adapt to a trauma. It is again, a primary response to trauma. So that's probably going to be in the system. And the tricky thing with this is the sooner someone can get help with that, the better, because of you get into dynamics in the relationship where if one of the partners rages all over the other one, then you get into this, well, if you didn't do that to me, I wouldn't have to do this.
Right. Yeah.
And then you're caught in a lose-lose. But the
Mhm.
more we can turn our attention inside and notice what is the effect. So again, probably an inner critic, probably rage, um, no doubt feelings of shame and defectiveness and unworthiness and all that goes with that. Um, yeah, so what other, I'm curious, this language, what other protective strategies have you
Oh my
seen
gosh.
that
Like
typically emerge?
some women will like do incredible feats to try to adjust and adapt their behavior. I mean, sorry, their bodies. Like
Oh,
if he is so
yeah.
into porn, like I must
Hmm.
not be attractive or sexy enough. So I have to lose weight or, have surgery or
Right,
wear more
right.
makeup,
Yeah.
wear high
Okay.
heels.
Yeah.
Also, in our faith communities, the go to response from a lot of clergy and spiritual leaders, and even some therapists who are not well informed, is an assumption that she was not having sex with him enough. And that's why he did
Oh,
this. And
yeah.
so, it's even if that's not stated, which by
Hmm.
the way, that's a total lie, listeners. Um, Sex addiction and affairs have nothing to do with what is
That's
happening in the
correct.
bedroom of the marriage. It's a completely different thing.
Yes.
But she may either sexually shut down
Right.
or she may feel like I have to perform in this
Right.
way rather than
Right.
the sexual relationship being about a
Yes.
mutual loving
Right.
connection. It becomes more of a fear response.
Absolutely. Yes. So you're talking about protective strategies.
Mhm.
This feeling of defectiveness that is going to result from this kind of betrayal, this kind of wounding, can give rise to a protective strategy of, well, I need to change my physicality,
Mhm.
or I need to behave in different ways sexually than maybe I'm comfortable with. That is that meets my needs. This is no longer about my needs. This is no longer about mutually loving connection. This is about I have to do these things that apparently he needs or she needs.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And then there's also the parts of us that are super reactive and make decisions to like, oh, I need to tell his whole family because they need to know who he really is, right? And
right.
there's a time and a place to decide who to tell, but it should be done from a thoughtful consideration, not a
That's right.
reactivity, because it can create a lot more relational problems.
People take sides. It can really
Yeah.
affect whether the couple can reconcile. People in the family will take sides,
Yeah.
and also, so this speaks to how vital it is for people to do the internal work,
Yeah.
to get the kind of support they need that people like you provide, to do the internal work
Mhm.
first, because the default is it's these externals that are going to fix it. My partner's going to change their behavior. My family's going to agree with me that whatever I'm trying to get them to agree with. And none of that is going to heal those wounds. The
No,
wounds have been inflicted. And that's the internal healing process that needs to unfold. And of course,
absolutely.
there's some things are happening in a parallel process. So of course there can be agreements made with the partner that
Yeah.
create safety.
Yes.
Uh, but your point about privacy is vital.
Mhm.
Being really clear, because people will get reactive about these things. And then
People are
you'll
very
be,
ignorant about these
well,
things
exactly. So you're going
and
to be pelted
judgmental.
with
Yeah.
advice that has nothing to do with an informed,
Mhm.
that isn't connected to being informed and aware.
Right.
And that's confusing, because then inevitably parts of the system will be seeking external authorities
Yeah.
and taking that in, and there's a lot of confusion and disorientation just from that.
Absolutely. And we could continue this conversation and pick apart all the different protectors that
Yeah,
arise for
yeah,
betrayal. But for the sake of time, I would love to move into people with unwanted sexual
yes,
behavior
yes.
and how the internal family system may show up.
Mhm,
Okay, there's the pre-discovery period,
mhm,
right,
mhm.
where it's all
Yeah,
pretty much a secret. And
right.
then there's the after it is either gets exposed, right?
Mhm,
Because the
mhm.
partner discovers it or they
Yeah,
decide to disclose it.
mhm,
And that is kind of a tipping point of chaos. But let's
yeah,
start with
okay.
how
When
this,
it's still a secret. Mhm,
yeah, and how this problematic sexual behavior
mhm,
probably originates.
yeah. Well, the specifics will be unique to the person, but it originates in trauma. It originates in wounding. So, and again, I like to use the word adversity because an individual with unwanted sexual behaviors might say, well, I know my history. I've never experienced trauma. What are you talking about, trauma? But we've all experienced adversity. And until we can be with the parts of the system that hold the wounds, we don't know the stories they're going to tell us. One of the beautiful things about IFS is we don't go in there with a lot of, well, I know exactly this happened, so this happens. No, the system's organic. It's unique. Each of us are unique. So we go with curiosity when that individual's protective system will trust us enough
Mm,
and allows us access to those vulnerable, tender parts of the system that hold the wounds. They can tell their story, and that is healing. And we don't know the specifics of the story, but we can say we know there are wounds because we don't have to have a strategy to numb pain if we're not holding any pain. So there's an unhealed wound. And just as if we had a gash on our arm that we didn't have any stitches or a band-aid, it would be painful. And the system's got pain in it.
mhm.
And at some point, whether that's because of early exposure to pornography, sometimes I've had clients who've been in a home where pornography was available, whether it's exposure through some friend in childhood who says, "Hey, look at this stuff." It can be myriad things. So I don't even want to name the specifics
Yeah,
too much because then people can say, like, well, no, that didn't happen. That didn't happen.
yeah,
Something happened. And the system, a part of the system, adopted a strategy that says if I engage in this behavior, it's going to numb the pain.
yeah,
It's going to distract me from the pain. I'm going to feel positive. There's some biochemical
yeah.
stuff, as you know.
Yes.
So the endorphin release of engaging in some of these behaviors and all the things. And so it becomes positive. There's a positive hit for the system. And then we're wired to keep doing things that have a positive result for us. And so it becomes more compulsive.
Yeah.
And then other parts of the system, so the secrecy, because of course there is some awareness that this is not okay. If they're in a spiritual community that says this is not okay, it's still, I mean, certainly there are communities where that's not going to be an issue, but most of us probably live in environments where that's not viewed as okay. And certainly not understood as adaptive response to trauma.
Mm,
So other parts of the system take on jobs to keep it secret. And those are more those managerial protectors because there's an awareness of this is exposed, that there's going to be more wounding. It's not just about these initial wounds that provoke the behavior. Now, if this is exposed, there's going to be more wounding. There's going to be rupture in important relationships and all the things that go with that, the shame, the judgment, all the things. So there are parts of the system that do what they need to do to keep it secret. And
mm.
yeah, and again,
And
that
there's
can be,
also
yeah.
parts of the system that tell a story that it's their spouse's fault
Uh-huh.
that they
Yes,
engage in this behavior.
that's
There are
right.
parts of the
Hmm.
system that
Hmm.
have a narrative blaming somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suspect if most of us were honest, if we have any important relationships in our lives at all, whether it's with a spouse or a child or a parent or even a friend or coworker, we all have blamers in
Oh,
our
yeah.
system.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's adaptive. When you think of this really helps us understand how we function. It is protective to blame someone else, because if I'm not blaming someone else for something, I have to take responsibility and get curious about, gosh, I've got a part of me who's doing this thing. Hmm, I don't like to, that's why the spiritual discipline of confession is vital, because we're getting honest with ourselves and God. And it's,
Mhm.
if we can do that without judgment, which would be nice, that we can say, well, gosh, yeah, I'm human and I'm doing this thing. And it's nobody else's fault. I have agency, I have choice. It can be something very, very difficult. There can be a lot of factors that keep it entrenched. And so it's not to say that just by shifting to ourselves, this is, oh, easy peasy, I'm going to be able to stop doing this. But yeah, having, we start when we enter the system with wherever they are. What is it, as we bring curiosity, what is it we're hearing most? Well, we're stuck in blaming others. Okay, let's start there. Or we're
Yeah.
stuck in that self-criticism, or we're just riddled with shame, just flooded with shame. Well, we're going to start there.
Mm. So, Molly, this is so good. Let's move into the sexual secret is exposed, whether
Okay.
discovered or disclosed.
Yeah. Hmm.
What might be
Hmm.
happening in the system for the person with the unwanted sexual behavior once their secret
Hmm.
is out?
Yeah. Yeah. Goodness. So much. It's going to feel pretty chaotic in there,
Yes.
because whether I wonder how often it's disclosed to only one person and how quickly other people find out. So even if it's only one person, there's going to be judgment, even condemnation. That is going to elicit shame. And so here we have, shame is something held by exiles in the system. So it can provoke a lot of wounding. Maybe most of us probably have wounding from times when we know we disappointed someone important to us, and maybe it was pretty significant, and that's stuck in our system because there wasn't reconciliation, or it gets stuck for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's going to happen with this disclosure is some of the old stuff is going to flood us too. So it's
Mm.
not just about this moment, it's about our history.
Yeah.
And again, that can provoke a lot of different protective parts, um, parts that want to hide, that want to run away, that blame, uh, all of the above. So one day it's this, and the next day it's that, and here the other person is, like yesterday, you'd said you'd be fully transparent with me. You'd showed me everything. And then the next day, well, but I don't need to show you that because that wasn't that, that doesn't have anything to do with that. So so it's very disorienting for both systems.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. What would be your greatest recommendation for somebody who is a little further in recovery and
Mhm.
it's not quite so chaotic? Maybe
Uh-huh.
they've got a
Uh-huh.
good community around them,
Uh-huh.
helping them discover their triggers, and they're starting to learn how to take care of themselves, and they're starting
Mhm.
to learn how to tune into their core
Mhm.
emotional wounds and all of that. From an IFS standpoint, what would be your recommendation for that person with unwanted sexual behavior to continue to approach their system with love and have some forward motion with calming
Mhm.
when a trigger
Mhm.
does come?
Mhm. Yeah, so a practice when they notice they're activated. So it starts with being super intentional about self-awareness. That's not a negotiable. That's going to be a daily practice, particular because that's how we learn, well, what does activation mean for me?
Yeah.
Is it mostly somatic? Is it primarily I feel it in my gut, I feel it in my chest or my neck, all those parts of our body that can get tight? Is it more that we begin to have certain thoughts? I'm activated because I know this part of me says, let's go do this thing. let's go do this thing I know is going to soothe you. So,
Mhm.
whatever that is, being intentional about knowing oneself. And
Mm.
that only comes through the practice of self-awareness. So, and it can be multiple things, but getting to know the lay of the land, if you will, that internal terrain. And then in that moment of activation is noticing, is there any, one of the things we call is unblending
Mhm.
in IFS, is there any distance between me? Is there any spaciousness between my core self and this part of me who is responding to a trigger, whatever that response might be? And we can ask ourselves assessment questions of, is my heart open? I don't know about that. Maybe my heart's not so open. Okay, well, can I be a little bit curious, even a little bit curious about why this part of me, how they're trying to help me,
Yeah.
what provoked them? Sometimes we know what activates us, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes it's really obvious, sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And um, so that's a really important piece of self-assessment is, do I have any, what we talk about, these qualities of self-energy? And I know self-energy sometimes feels a little woo-woo to people, but I like to use the term anyway because love is energetic. When we're flooded with love, we feel it in our bodies.
Yeah.
And likewise, so there's energy that comes with curiosity or compassion or even a little bit of calm that says, okay, you know, if I can be with this part of me that wants to go do this thing, the system's going to downregulate a little bit because that's where the neurology, the physiology comes in. Like, it's actually, we're oriented to the present because it's actually not a threat. Like the lion isn't actually coming to get us.
Um,
So we can be with, and then sometimes if they have a little bit more skill, they know how to be with and befriend this part. If they're not there yet, just creating a space that, okay, you're here. I know you want to do that. We have some choices. What are our choices? How about you
yeah.
help me? Let's figure out what our alternatives are.
Mm. So good. So good. And one thing I want to add, it's so hard to do all of these things, like becoming more
Yeah.
self-aware and whatnot. I think one thing that can really help is using a journal, right? To write
Mm-hmm.
down.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a buddy who is doing their own parts work, talking about it with them can be great too.
Yes.
And certainly the very best is finding a therapist who does IFS.
Yeah.
But friends, we are about out of time, and I could talk to Molly for hours. You guys, if you want to learn more, what I recommend is that you get her book, Restoring Relationship, Transforming Fear into Love Through Connection. We will put a link to Molly's website in our show notes. Molly, thank you for taking time to share your expertise and wisdom. And your work is such a gift. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me. And your work is a gift. And my heart goes out to all of your listeners and on their healing journey. Uh, Transformation is possible. What you've been doing for a reason, and you're loved just as you are.
Yeah, that's a good way to end. Thank you
Mhm.
so much, Molly. And until next time, I am holding out hope for you.